Welcome, everyone. On today's episode, I have a good friend, Philippe Boteri from Accel. We have several investments in common, so this is a long overdue episode talking about all the decisions that we've made jointly together over the years, the overlap there. But as with every episode, we do a little bit trying to understand the man behind the legend, where it started, where it is today, and thoughts on things like AI, regulation, cybersecurity. So welcome, Philippe.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So today, I want to start off with your background on McKinsey and Bessemer. You graduated from school and you worked as a consultant, and then you moved into venture. But maybe walk us through how that journey looked like, why that transition. You're originally from Western Europe, and then how do you ended up making all the moves around? Just tell us a little bit about that background.
Sure. So I was born and raised in France, as everybody can tell from the accent. Engineering background, but decided to start my career with McKinsey. And I was lucky in terms of timing because I started in '98, which in Europe was when the dotcom boom really started. I mean, the dotcom boom was short-lived. In Europe, it was from '98 to 2000, 2001. I was lucky to just start my professional career at that time. And so that gave me the opportunity as a young consultant at McKinsey in Paris to work actually on a lot of technology projects. And so I wrote several business plans for e-commerce company. I don't know if you remember at the time, like every company wanted to have an e-commerce business plan. So we did a lot of that. I actually worked for a company that was called Opodo, which is kind of an online travel agency, which was actually a project that McKinsey put together with 11 or 12 European airlines. And the idea was to build basically an online distribution for all these airlines company. And so I worked for close to a year on that project based in London. And we actually started with 45 consultants and ended up with a company of 60, 70 employees and then no consultants at the end. So that was probably the least efficient way to build a company that I have seen. But the company went on and was successful and was bought out, I think several times by different PE firm. But that was kind of my foray into tech, and that opened my eyes about what was happening in technology. And I said, well, this is where I want to work and spend the rest of my career. So at that point, I applied for transfer to the Silicon Valley office because I was like, if I want to do tech, there's one place to be, that place is Silicon Valley. And so I wanted to find my way there. My transfer was approved in October 2000, which was, as you can imagine, very nice for it to be approved, but also very unrealistic in terms of timing. Then everything crashed. And so my transfer got being postponed. And I ended up, and I think in life, you need to be lucky. You need to create your own luck, but you also need to be lucky. And I was very lucky that in 2003, there was a partner from Silicon Valley who transferred to the Paris office. And that person, when he was in Silicon Valley, was in charge of the transfer to that office. And so I knew the head of the Paris office well. He was in the tech practice as well, did many projects with him. And so I asked him to say, well, now this is the time to make it happen. And so he asked that partner to help me, and we made that transfer work. And it's interesting because that partner from Silicon Valley stayed at McKinsey for just a year, and then he went on to join Nokia. And during that year, he helped me transfer. And then I moved to Silicon Valley, went on to serve a lot of technology clients in the Valley. And after 3 or 4 years there, I got my green card. I was like, okay, now, McKinsey and consulting, that was a great experience. But now I really want to do something closer to technology, closer to companies. And I wanted to combine my passion for technology, for investing, and for working with young technology companies. And I thought about that. I think the natural conclusion for me was that I need to go into venture. And that's where I kind of started to look for venture role. And I was lucky at the time to meet with Byron Dieter at Bessemer, and he was looking for someone to help him build their cloud practice. And I'd done a lot of work in software, and I was like, well, that's a fantastic opportunity. So I left McKinsey and joined Bessemer and started my journey in venture, and never regretted it. It's been an awesome journey for the past 16 or 17 years now.
Yeah, so you've been in venture a while, and you brought with you those years of consulting experience. And Before we get into individual sectors, I think if I can force you to pick the top 3 lessons you've learned over those years, what would those be? Top 3 lessons that you learned from your entire career and venture.
It's a good question. I think I would say the first lesson for me, which I think venture, at the end of the day, venture is all about making investments, right? So I'm trying to see what I've learned in terms of making successful investments. And overall, I think one of my learning has been that, sometimes my aperture has been a bit too narrow in terms of the way I select a company. And sometimes I'm like, well, you know what, if you had invested in 30% more companies. So if I look at the companies I've spent a lot of time and end up not doing an investment, if I made these investments, I think I probably would have had a lot more success in my portfolio, right? So I think that now there's always a question of, well, would I have been able to manage that many investments, etc. But overall, I think to me, the learning here is, there are some companies where, you probably look at them and see, well, right now they're probably not meeting the bar, but maybe the bar was a bit too high. And, there are a lot of things that, you cannot predict in the way these companies are going to evolve that are going to make them successful. So I think to me, that's kind of one learning, which is trying to really push myself when I think about an investment. There is what you can see today, and then there's what it can become tomorrow. And trying to find the right balance between both of them, I think is something that is super important, not very easy to do, but something that trying to pay a lot more attention to in terms of how I weight these two, these two elements. I think that's for me like one key learning. The second learning, which relates more as how do you help company be very successful? And I found that one thing that, when you have great companies, usually it's never up and straight to the right. There is always some phase where it goes very fast, some phase slow down, then it can reaccelerate. And I found that usually the main reason of a company slowing down is linked to hiring, meaning companies not hiring the right people at the right time. And I think the mistake that I've seen a lot of companies do is to try and hire someone when they see the need, instead of sitting down and having kind of an org for the next 12 months and say, okay, here's how I want the org to be in 6 months from now. And making sure that you plan the hiring so the person is here when you need the person, and you don't trigger the hire when you need the person, because that's how you kind of easily can lose, 5-6 months. And that's even more, I think, pronounced in Europe because of all the labor laws. Like in the US, you can, if you're, you can hire potentially someone in 2 months, right? If you're lucky, find the right person, they can quit the job, start in a month. In Europe, you'll find a lot of people who have 3, even sometimes 6 months before they can join a company, and that kind of compound that effect. So I think for me, this has been kind of one of the key reason for which companies, things that can slow down company over time. So that would be, I think, the second thing that I've learned. And I would say that the third thing, which I think have been something that, you realize looking back at kind of 15 years of venture and the different cycle, that at the end of the day, it is all about the right trends. And that kind of, you would see that the tide will carry all boats. And to me, it's really about understanding kind of what is the next tide. And if you pick the right tide, I think then you have a lot more, flexibility in terms of picking the right companies. But if you have the wrong tide, you can still have a successful company, but then it is a very, very narrow set of companies who are going to be, very, very successful. So to me, if I kind of reflect about the past 15, 16 years, it's kind of what I would see would be my top three learnings.
Yeah, and that last one on tides is a very good one to reflect a little bit on the investments you've led in Accel, DocuSign, Sneak, UiPath, chain analysis, and maybe you can just walk through the things that made you feel like they were at the right time, because it's not always obvious that they were at the right time. We just did this investment in Synthesia together. And one of the things that is happening right now with regards to AI is that ChatGPT and OpenAI have really cracked the door open on that. And that was only 6 months ago that a lot of ML companies probably didn't even have awareness of what was coming down the road, right? And so I'm just curious as to, in your point of view, is how do you know the right tide's there?
Yeah, I think that is it's a very good question, because being too early is the same as being wrong. That's that I think the reality. And so if you take, for example, UiPath, and because it is a company that had a very interesting journey. It was founded as consulting companies, and can kind of find its way into into RPA. When we started discussing with the company and led the Series A in 2017, I think we're at the point where, we're looking at cloud and SaaS. We've been looking at that sector for probably 2006, 2007, that's when product really started. When I was in the Valley, I think the first generation of companies were basically taking existing software application which were on-prem and putting them in the cloud with a ton of benefit. And so at that time, I would say we were looking at the analog on the on the on-prem side, and you kind of, this is roughly the size of the market, this is the momentum, this is how you go to market, and that's kind of how we were thinking about the opportunities. But then there was this new thing that happened in 2014, 15, 16, which is, now how can you do actually more with cloud? Like, how can you do things that were not done before and bring that level of process automation to the next level? And that's kind of what we were really looking at. And then when we looked at RPA, we looked at it, it was like, wow, this is something that is totally new, that no one has done before, and that is bringing level of automation that no one has seen before. And that happened at a time where, you look at, between 2000 and kind of 2012, 14, a lot of savings in the enterprise were done through offshoring, and say, okay, well, what if we offshore everything to Asia and India? That's how we drive savings. And then you get to 2014, 15, and you're like, well, once we have offshored everything we can offshore, and now the cost of living is increasing in India, like, where are these savings going to come? So there was really a need at the time for that next level of basically process automation to drive more productivity in the enterprise. And that's where UiPath came in with a technology that actually no one had done before. There were only a couple of companies with Blue Prism and Automation Anywhere in that space, still all were at the very early stage. And so to me, when I look at all these trends going together, I'm like, wow, there is enough here to start to build the next platform to drive enterprise automation, and RPA being kind of the first step into it. That's kind of how we're thinking about it. And then, so that's kind of the thesis. And then to validate that thesis, we call all the partners from UiPath, like the SI that we're working with them. And it was like they were all excited, all investing a lot in building their RPA practice at the time. And you're like, okay, well, the ecosystem is investing in it. The enterprise, the customers want it. They have the right technology, so all the right ingredients for the fire to start taking off. So that kind of how we thought about it at the time.
Yeah, so you saw all these things moving peripherally, and then of course you see where it's headed. But when you look at where things are headed, sometimes, it depends how much you factor what that time frame is, right? Because for 3 years, 4 years, you can see a trend, but then something like OpenAI comes out the other end, and then it shifts how people are using technology internally. And so I wanted to ask you on this point of RPA, but then moving into AI, it's what made you back Synthesia? Because this is a whole new wave of things which could disrupt how things were done in the past and architecturally change everything. How do you reconcile investments that you've done in the past and how they're affected by new technologies? But how did you make a decision in something like Synthesia, which is so early in many ways in a trend? Of course, we're investors as well, so we believe that this is a game-changing technology, but I'd love to hear your thesis on Synthesia and how it impacts other businesses.
Sure. Yeah, very happy to go into that. Like, I'm a big fan of Synthesia and what they have done. I think it's a super exciting technology and team. So if you look at just generative AI, because that's where it all starts from, I think we're seeing, and I'm seeing generative AI, for me, it is a breakthrough that is as important as cloud was in 2006, 2007, or as the iPhone was, I think it was 2007, the first one, which kind of turned the phone into a computing platform. Like, I think these were fundamental tectonic shifts in technology. And I think that generative AI is at least going to bring some level of disruption and opportunities. Now, I think for me, there are two different things on generative AI. There is one side, how can existing company integrate generative AI in their product to make their value proposition even more compelling? And then there is what are the technology and the companies that couldn't happen before, but can happen now because you have generative AI. And so if I look at a company like UiPath, they have always integrated, evolved from RPA to a full automation platform. And this new AI technology is just a better way for them to continue to automate more processes. So, I'm very hopeful that generative AI is going to bring a lot to a lot of existing companies and product. Now, when we look at Gen AI, we're also obviously looking at what are the unique business models that can emerge from that technology. And so we've been looking at the space for a year now, and we looked at the different layer of the stack. So you start with the foundational models. Then you have the apps that are built on top of it. You have the management layer to make everything work together. And when we looked at Synthesia, we're like, okay, there's been a ton of models that have been on the tech side. A lot of companies have been built on top of these models. And so the question on the tech side is like, how can you really be differentiated? Because that's what everybody's doing. That's where OpenAI is investing a lot. Then you look at images, and to some extent, images a bit less crowded, but still a lot of different models and great companies. And then we looked at Synthesia and what they were doing. And what they were doing is something that nobody else was doing. Well, nobody else, not true. There are 12 or 15 other startups that are trying to do the same thing. But it's not that there is a big foundational model out there who can say, okay, now I can do exactly what Synthesia is doing. And the reason for that is, like, when you look at the technology, it is something that is pretty unique by itself because it starts with human avatar. And it's not about taking an existing video of a human in motion and trying to put that in an overlay to totally change it, but all the mechanics, etc., are driven by the human. Here, there's nothing, and then suddenly you generate a human that is speaking, which is something that is extremely hard to do. And there isn't a more foundational model out there who says, well, this is what I do, and I've been trained on, the zillion of data that are all available out there. I think the data for that is actually very hard to acquire because it deals with humans. So there's a lot of implication about privacy. You also need a different angle, high definition, etc. So this is something where you're like, wow, the data is not very easy to acquire. And I think Synthesia has done a very good job at being able to access this data, have their own research team, refine and build their own model. So there is here a real differentiation, and obviously privacy is something that is super important for the company. So all the data that you're using is licensed. So you don't have the issue that you have with a lot of generative AI algorithms that have been trained on a lot of data. Some of it may or may not have been properly licensed. I think for Synthesia, it's been a core priority for all the founders to make sure that everything that they use is properly licensed. So to me, it all started with the technology, and it felt like they had real differentiation through access to proprietary data, a specific research team focusing on a problem that is not something that a ton of companies have been able to solve or can be solved with a very big and large model. So to me, that was something that was very important. Now, it's like great technology. You want to see, well, what is it going to be? What is it doing for the world, for consumer, for enterprise? And what I really like about Synthesia is that they were laser focused on the enterprise and saying, well, how can this technology bring real value to the enterprise? And there are two ways that you can look at their technology. I mean, one way is to say, well, if you're producing a video, by using Synthesia, you can reduce the cost of that video by pretty much 95%. And why? Because suddenly you just have to type text to create a video instead of having someone in a studio, and if you pronounce something the wrong way, you have to redo everything from scratch. And then if you want to change one thing, because let's say you do a video to present a product and suddenly there's a new feature in the product, so you need to update the video, so you have to redo everything from scratch. In Synthesia, you can just basically change a word in your text and then generate a new video. So if you use video, production costs 95% less. Now, the other way to look at it is say, well, but if you can't do video today because it's too expensive, you're using PowerPoint or documents. But unfortunately, people are not very good at reading documents. They're much better at watching videos. And so the second, and I think that is a large part of their vision, say, well, can we change every document, every PowerPoint, every PDF into a video that makes it a lot more engaging and make the content much easier to understand and better to train people? And that's what they're doing, which is saying, well, let's take all the content out there and see how we can make video. And to me, that approach makes a ton of sense, because if you look at the world today, the one thing that keeps growing is the number of minutes of video watched. If you look at the young generation today, they're on YouTube, they're on TikTok, everything is about video. And all the stats showing that the number of minutes of video by human is actually growing and keeps growing over time. And so the idea of bringing this new video to the enterprise, to me, is something that kind of makes a lot of sense, and where you look at it, the potential is unbounded. So that's the part which is very exciting. Then there is the third element, which is you have a great product and great technology, you have a market, you can really add a lot of value for it, but then how do you market it and make it usable? And I think that's where Synthesia has been, very good. And I think a lot of, I would say, Gen AI companies are great technology, but still trying to find a market. This is a technology, a Gen AI company that had found a market, and they're very good, very decent revenue at scale, growing super fast, and with a very strong go-to-market model, which is based on kind of PLG adoption coupled with enterprise sales that is working super effectively. So if you look at these three things, to me, it was like, wow, this is a great combination. And then you have the thing which comes on top, which is how is the founding team to make all this work. And Victor and Stephen, I mean, you spend an hour with them, and you know that these are guys that you want to back. So to me, this kind of how I would summarize the investment thesis. And we did several calls with our customers, and we heard an amazing story of how companies were using that technology and the kind of impact it was having. For example, I was talking to an automotive manufacturer who is shipping every month, several documents to their dealership with all the updates on the different cars. And that translated into a lot of calls into the call center, because people just don't read documents, or maybe they think they read it, but they don't really remember everything. And then they change that by incorporating video, and suddenly the number of calls in the call center is going down. So it's just like one example, but there are a lot of examples like that showing how this technology can be super impactful.
Yeah, I mean, that's very, very thoughtful response to Synthesia and why now. One of the things that I want to revisit is that you talked about the lessons learned. You talked about you matured and understood how to best help a company become successful. And when you look at this new wave of Gen AI companies, they have unique challenges that are of the times. And I'm curious as to how you would adapt, or what kind of thoughts you have about what it takes to help a company in the Gen AI space going forward be successful, because of all the implications that come with what these technologies can do.
Yep, that is a very good question. I think, and as you say, I think part of it is a lot of things we do to help, companies in general, and part of it's very specific to Gen AI company. And let me start with the part that I think is more specific. The one thing which is interesting about and different about generative AI, it's something that I've never seen in my career before, is that this is a technology that is driven by world-class leading research. And usually, if you look at the history of technology, there is always like a multi-year gap between what the top-notch scientists are working on in the research paper and when this is applied into a company. And so that's why no one ever knew the top research scientists at FAIR or at DeepMind or at Apple, right? No one had ever heard about them. And suddenly with generative AI, we're getting to a point where the leading research is directly applied in the enterprise. And suddenly the researcher who have been in the back room that no one was talking about, they end up at the forefront, talking to founders, talking to companies. And to me, that is something that is unprecedented because I've never seen that at least in my 15, 16 years of venture experience. But so what does this mean? That means that for technology like generative AI company, suddenly it's not about like the R&D that, which is mostly engineering and then products. Now you really have research. Like it's fundamental research within a company, which is, if you think about it, like who would have thought like in venture, you would have startups with a real research team, right? And that's something that's totally different. So now suddenly you're like, how can I help the company build a top research team? And so on our side, that means, what do we need to do? That means we need to have a relationship with all these researchers. And that's what we've done at Accel for the past 6-7 months. We have identified all the top researchers, especially in personal, I've been focusing a lot on Europe. So all the top researchers in Europe, we've been inviting them to different dinners and events, start building the relationship. And then so we can make introduction of this top researcher to our founders. And that's basically what we've done with Synthesia, which hopefully, fingers crossed, is also going to have a big impact. So to me, that is one area that is very different. The other area, which is also different, is access to data and licensing of data. Like it's not the first thing when you invest in a technology company, say, where are you going to find data to build your product? This is not a problem that usually you build software, you build cyber company. It's all about the technology that you're building, software that you're building, how you bring it to market. And here, certainly it's like, well, you have a research team, but for this research team to be successful, you need to have access to a lot of data to be able to train your model. So how do you access this data? And how do you make sure that everything is properly licensed? How does this fit into the regulatory framework, which obviously is very early and fuzzy right now? So you need to kind of play into a space that is not very defined, start to understand what risk you're wanting to take because you think that's the direction the legislation is going to go, or other things that you don't want to take because you're sure that it's not going to fall in the legislation and don't want to be in trouble in the future. So being at the forefront of understanding what is happening on all the regulatory front and be able to feed that back to companies and have this discussion with the founders of how to set the proper strategy in an environment that is very uncertain. I think this is something that is totally new and different that we've been working on. And if you have looked at my LinkedIn profile, published a video using Synthesia, which is interesting about what I've been kind of summarization of the EU AI Act. It's a 3-minute video. It got a ton of views, but it really showed the interest of the community for what's happening on that front. And that's an area where we can really help.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Just to double click on that point, one of the things that is emerging to me as a clear thing that investors are going to have as a sort of a additional voice in board meetings and in shareholder meetings is this perspective on what regulation is, but not just regulation. Maybe I haven't told you the story, but early days when we backed Synthesia, one of the first conversations we had with Victor and Stefan was building out what is their code of ethics. And I think every company in the space is going to have to think about that. And Synthesia have a page on their website that goes through the 4 values that they have on the subject. They put people first always. They talk about the content moderation process that they have. They always talk about that there is an explicit permission that needs to happen from the image and likeness of somebody before it's used. And of course, their collaboration with media organizations and governments and research institutions. And so I think a large part of what investors are going to have to do that's new in this new generation is helping calibrate that. And as you said, calibrating it not just in terms of regulation that is coming down, but also from a brand stewardship point of view. Like you can't just be distracted, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Synthesia has been at the forefront of pushing for regulatory framework and being laser focused on moderation. I mean, they had avatars of well-known public figures and also a lot of people who, and your avatar is kind of your digital representation. So you don't want your avatar to say anything you don't want your physical person to say. And so that is very important to have a very strong moderation, very strong security around the use of these avatars. And I think we're just at the very beginning of the journey. To me, the thing is, I didn't mention it, but one of the reasons behind the investment, why we've been like super impressed by what they've been doing is just like, we looked at an avatar a year ago, an avatar today, and you look at the progress that they have made and just within a year. And if you kind of not even extrapolate, but just draw a straight line and you'll say, where are we going to be in 3-4 years from now? And you say, you're not going to be able to tell. The
VR AR, my friend, VR AR. We're gonna visualize them right here. We're gonna have an interaction with them. It's everything I wanted to do in Snow Crash and every other science fiction novel I've ever watched, right? So it'll be interesting times for sure. However, on that point of interesting times, I wanted to talk a little bit about the implications on cybersecurity. Now, you guys, and you in particular, have had some amazing investments in cybersecurity, including Sneak. And for those of you that aren't following Philippe's blog, you can find it at Cracking the Code. I'm going to nudge him to publish again because he's got some great pieces, but it's been a little bit since you published your last one. But one of the more recent ones, you're unpacking the cloud security and compliance stack. And the irony of this is, this was written before all this explosion of Gen AI. You outline the stack as infrastructure layer, identity layer, application layer, and data layer. And I'm just curious now that we're talking about Gen AI, first of all, would you add another layer? Maybe, maybe not, maybe just sits in application. But what are the things that you're looking for now in cybersecurity in light of this explosion of potentially damaging technologies, both in terms of authentication, in terms of the speed of code can be written? Maybe just walk us unpack what your thesis on cybersecurity is right now.
Yeah, obviously we're very focused on the impacts of generative AI on what does it mean for cyber security and what does it mean for companies who want to leverage generative AI. And I think there's going to be different aspects of it. I think the first aspect, which is, well, if you want generative AI to flourish within an organization, you need to leverage your own data. And for that, you need to make sure that your data is perfectly secure, but that also you need what type of data you can use and what type of data you can't use, and who can have access to the results, infer from this data, who cannot have access to the result infer from this data. So to some extent, if you're the CEO of a company and you ask a question to one of your LLM application, you're going to get an answer. But if you're 4 levels down, you shouldn't have the same answer because you're not going to be able to leverage the same data. So it basically is going to require a new understanding of how data is actually classified within an organization. And so for me, it all starts with this data layer. And that's why, a year ago, we're very focused on the data layer, led the Series A into Sierra, and, a year later, so a week ago, we announced we led the Series B in the same company. And obviously, even if you leave aside generative AI, I think the data layer in the cloud is something that is fundamental, very important that companies, this is like a top priority for CISO right now. And what Sierra has done is basically they built a layer that lets you identify at a very granular level, where is your data, what kind of data you have, and what is the security posture around this data. And obviously with generative AI now, the need for this is growing exponentially. So I think that is one aspect of it where we're super focused on it. Now, there's a question of, okay, now what is the next step of cyber and generative AI? Well, you can improve productivity, right? Because generative AI into cyber product is going to lead to productivity improvement. So we're looking at all the companies leveraging generative AI to improve your performance of your stocks and how you can automate a lot more tasks. And you have companies like Snake who are obviously incorporating now all this technology into their product. And then there is a second aspect, which is, what does this mean for the attacker? And then therefore, what do you need to defend against it? I think the part which is a bit scary, right, is you look at the attackers are very good at leveraging the next generation technology to perform their attack. And so if you look at the power of generative AI, what does this mean for an attacker? It means that instead of an attacker directly attacking the company, now the attacker is going to leverage an LLM to attack a company. And what does this mean? It means that first, the attack is going to be much faster because the ability to iterate from a machine is much faster than the ability to do it from a man. And two, the leverage you get is much larger, so the attack surface is much larger. So that means that in the future, you're going to attack that are going to happen much faster on a much larger scale. So what does this mean? It means that for the defense, historically, the defense was man against man. Like you have one attacker, you have a defense, and you have people who say the defense, they are good enough, they can stop the attacker and with the right tool. But now if it's a machine attacking, then it has to become machine against machine. And so the next level of cyber warfare is going to be basically operator commanding machines to attack and defend at the same time. And that's creating a totally new paradigm for security. So that's, I think, another level where we're trying to figure out and say, well, what are the new tools that companies can adopt to basically help defend themselves against that kind of attacks. So that's another layer. And then there is even another layer around the LLM models. And you say, well, now that you're going to have application based on LLM, the question out there is, can the application protection tools, are they going to be enough? Or do you need something specific to protect LLM apps? Because then suddenly you can have different type of attacks, including prompt injection, etc. And so do you need a new kind of cyber application layer to protect against that, or can the existing tools incorporate different technology to solve that problem? So that's also something we're looking into.
Yeah, it's complicated, absolutely complicated. And I think there's near-term opportunities, and then there's obviously the longer, more existential ones. The near ones that are particularly scary is authentication in any sort, right? Authentication, both voice or video, but how that's used for social engineering, that fascinates. We've actually just made a few investments, which are too early for you guys, maybe, but they're entirely on analyzing the video and or audio with a view that it can show different things. Just the way that as a human, you can be like, that doesn't feel right. It's the I doesn't feel right technology. So we're very much in agreement here in that it's an area. So just to conclude, one of the things I like to sort of end with is advice that you can give founders. I mean, you've led so many great investments within Accel. You focus on cloud computing enterprise, marketplace businesses, and you write and break down why you've invested very beautifully. What are the takeaways that you could give founders to know when they're ready for you to look at them, but also that will make them really stand out as a successful company?
Yeah. So on the first question, I would say that we do anything from $1 million seed to $100 million growth investment. So I think we can speak to founder at any stage of their journey. We're even speaking to people who are thinking about founding a company in the phase of ideating and helping them. So I think on that, I would say we're open to talk to any founders, and they shouldn't think that they need to be ready to speak to us. Any founder who is thinking about starting a company, who has started a company looking for funding, should feel ready to speak to us. I want to emphasize this because I think that is a very important point. Now, in terms of what advice I would give to the founder, I think the first one is really to be passionate about what you're doing, because at the end of the day, the success is going to come from the passion and the vision. And to me, one of the key things I look into when I speak to a founder is like, what has been the driving motivation to start the company? What do they want to achieve? What is the vision behind the company? And so I think, it's important to think about what is a problem that you want to solve today? Like, where does it start with something that is well defined? And then where do you want to be in 5, 6, 7 years from now, and turn into something bigger with a broader impact? I think this is something for founder that is very important to kind of think, what is the journey going to look like? And obviously you need to have a strong starting point, and the starting points need to have a well-defined problem, a well-defined solution, providing a good ROI to whoever the consumer or the customer is. And then how can that feed over time into something that is broader? To me, that is something that is very important, and really start with the passion. The second thing I would say is the point I made earlier in the podcast, but be very thoughtful about who to hire and when to hire, and always think forward, right? Think about where do you want to be in 12 years from now, what you need to get there on a rolling, of course, basis, and make sure that you don't wait too much to hire the people that you need, because that's what is going to enable you to really scale over time. And then the third element, and I had a very good discussion with Danielle from UIPath at SaaStr London a couple of weeks ago. And I was asking, so one of the things which was very striking with Daniel is that he always had very ambitious goals. And the company went to grow from 5 to 45 million to 175 million. So, and to get there, he had these targets where when we invested, he said, well, I want to do 50 million this year. He's like, Daniel, if you do 20 or 25, that's going to be good enough. It's like, no, but I think I can do 50, and he did 45. And then the year after, it's like, well, I can do 100. He did 175. So the question is like, well, it's great. You need ambitious goals, but you need goals that also are going to be realistic, because, if you set a goal at 50 and you end up at 12, then it doesn't really feel like a goal. And so understanding how do you stretch the goal, make it ambitious, make it bold, but still achievable, so you can motivate your team to go and get there. I think, to me, that is something that is very hard to do. And that's the difference between bold and crazy. And for founder, being able to find that limit, I think is something that is very hard, but I think is something that is also a key factor of success. And if you look at all the outliers we had in our portfolio, I mean, these are founders who are very good at defining and being bold, but without being too crazy in a way that would demotivate everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it is easy to do. I think it is very hard to do, but I think that is something that is really worth thinking hard when you're a founder. See, where do you want to put that goalpost?
Yeah, I think it's a very good life lesson in general. I mean, I think it's hard even to have goals that are not silly, but not sandbagging your outcome either. Well, with that, Philippe, it was an absolute pleasure having you here. And for anyone who's listening who wants to learn more about Philippe, you can find him on LinkedIn. You can follow his blog on Twitter as well, I presume, Philippe.
Yeah, and I brought a lot of LinkedIn as well, so that's why my blog has been a bit lighter recently. I mix between both.
You got to just RPA that, man. Post on LinkedIn, post on cracking the code.
Exactly.
There you go. All right, guys. Till next time. Bye.
Thank you.